Would have sure helped me when I started for someone to just quickly explain the most used functions inside of Unity. And that is these built-in functions that pretty much any game engine is going to have, but they're going to be named slightly different per game engine. But here's what they do in Unity. So first of all, you can use Unity's documentation and search the order of execution for event functions. This will show the order of every single possible function, built-in function in Unity, and how it's called, and then how it's updated and circles back and all that fun stuff. If you can't be asked to learn this, or it just gets kind of confusing for you like it does for me sometimes, always can refer back to it. I'll leave a link in the description, but I will also leave a link to this script so that you can just copy paste this script to your game and get started with me. So first things first, awake is used to initialize variables or states before the application starts. So if we want to get some sort of component or set some sort of variable before the game even starts, this is where we would do it. And then on enable is when you enable an object. So when not necessarily when the object gets spawned, but when the object gets enabled, when it gets turned on, right? But on enable is still called when a object is, say, let me make a cube. Let's imagine this cube here is just spawned in suddenly. It's still going to call awake and on enable since it was enabled at some point, even though it was spawned in. So don't think just because it says on enable, it's only when the object is enabled or disabled. It's whenever the object is enabled for any reason. And so I'm going to put that test script, going to remove it from the scene and put it on the cube. So for example, if I do debug.log awake and on enable, let's go ahead and add start, all the initialize functions. And start's going to be called on the first frame of the update. So this is literally just jumping to update and then getting the first update. So if you want to do something before update, actually, because it's called once per frame, you would do it in start because it will do everything and then the update on that first frame, if that makes sense. Even though it's all happening on the first frame. So start, maybe I'll put the note down here. Start comes first, even though it's also first frame of this, if that makes sense. It's still not making much sense, I know. So anything you put in the update will continuously update. As to the start, it will only update it the first time and before update, okay? So if I hit play here, I should, yes, in order, get awake, on enable, and start. And that's always going to be the order because awake is called first and then on enable and then reset, which is a editor function. I won't get into that. And then start. So we have awake, on enable, and start just like it should. And if we were to do something like, say, let's skip to the decommissioning on disable, we can now disable it and it will say on disable, enable it, and it will say on enable again, and we can do that repeatedly. Now let's just reposition the cube because I don't like it not being in the camera frame. There we go. Continuing further, I'll just go ahead and finish decommissioning and then we'll skip back to physics and game logic. On destroy will be called when the game object is destroyed and only when the object is destroyed. So this is going to look like, notice how we aren't getting any destroy debugs because it hasn't been destroyed yet, but if I just delete it from the scene, it will call both on disable and on destroy because it was both disabled and then destroyed, because that's how the order works, I believe. Let's see, disable and destroy, yes. So again, always refer back to this if you're confused as to what's happening, why something's being called twice or something like that. This will save you a ton of time. And then on application quit will happen when the application quits, obviously. So in your game, this is going to look like when you actually close the game, but in your editor, this is going to look like when you stop running your game in the editor. And you'll see on application quit was called, on disable, on destroy. I have them in order here as the order is here. So on application quit, on disable, on destroy, on application quit, on disable, on destroy. just like it's supposed to. And now there's actually 3 different updates, which is confusing, and it even confuses me often. So the first one is your fixed update, which is your physics. The function is called every, I'm just hovering over it because I can never remember. The function is called every fixed frame, and the mono behavior called. So this fixed frame is going to be determined by your physics setting. So the difference between this and your update is this update uses all FPS. This update uses the fixed physics rate. If that makes sense. I don't want to call it a physics frame rate. But if we go into our project settings and we go into our time, actually, it will be based on, I believe, your fixed time step. Yes, your fixed update. See, there it is. It tells you right there. And so we'll make a debug called fixed update here. And then we're going to also make one for the regular update, which again is just uses all the FPS. And then I also always forget what late update is, so let's re-remember it together. Late update is called every frame if behavior is enabled. What? Oh, I literally had to Google. Okay, so it is what I thought it was. It's just this update also uses all FPS, but after update. Okay, so this is kind of like binary here. This is 0. And this is 1, right? We can have 2 different updates, basically. The first update is going to be called on the first frame. So when we have frame 1, we're going to get update, and then also on frame 1 after update, we will get late update. And then we'll move to frame 2, and then we'll get update. And then also on frame 2, we'll get late update. And then we'll move to frame 3, and we'll get update, and we'll also get late update. You get it? We'll just keep doing that cycling over and over. So if I run this now, we should see fixed update, update, and then late update, updating in that order. Fixed update, update, late update. Yep. Okay, now the beast of burden for many Unity beginners, because they tend to forget that the on trigger enter and on collision enter are physics. Do not forget. And I believe this might be the same for peer overlap, but we won't get into that because it's not really a function. It's more like a static, well, I guess it's a static function you call an update, but it's not a built-in function into your code. I cannot explain that. Anyways, when we're using on collision, let's just start with on trigger. Who cares? And I'll go ahead and make a debug for both. So when we're using on trigger, we need to always enable the trigger. Now, the other thing a lot of people tend to forget is because it's physics, it needs a rigid body. And depending on what you're doing, you may want to have gravity on or off. In our case, we're going to have it off. And if it's like a character or something that's being animated, we want to use is kinematic. And this will determine whether physics is affecting it or not. So I think if you have it on, physics doesn't affect it, and then if it's off, it does. I can't remember, or vice versa. So anyways, we can leave that on or off for now, honestly. We will now add something for it to collide into. And remember, whatever it collides into needs to have some sort of collider, okay? And so where's the first cube? And there it says on trigger enter. Oh, and I almost forgot. We could also add on trigger exit, which will show when it exit, and I think you can even do on collision exit, yeah, which will show basically when the collision exits, you know, because atoms can't touch and all that. And so what this will look like now is we get the on trigger enter, and then when this volume leaves the volume it entered, we'll get the exit. And remember, this is based on the physics rate. All of these are based on the physics rate. So if you're ever wondering why like on trigger enter or on trigger exit is missing sometimes, or on collision enter or on collision exit, it's probably your physics rate, but also moving on to on collision. The other reason it might be missing is because you need to usually set it to continuous dynamic to get the best type of collision detection. This is really, really important for bullets. I got so confused and wrote so much bad code that kept messing everything up even when I switched it to continuous dynamic that I thought it wasn't continuous dynamic. So please understand that if your bullets are not registering and you're using physics rigid bodies for your bullets, you need to put it on continuous dynamic. Continuous is the next, I think, most one. Discrete really tries to not register as often. So if you're using fast moving stuff, you need continuous dynamic. If it's relatively fast, I guess, you could use continuous, and then if it's just slow, it can be discrete. And then continuous speculative is just bananas. So for now, I'm going to use it on continuous dynamic. Generally what I do is just leave it on discrete, and then if I get problems, I switch it to continuous dynamic. So moving forward, here's what the collision on enter collision on collision enter and exit will look like. Actually, let's make it look a little bit more realistic. I'm going to actually drop it and give it gravity so that we can observe what a collision will actually register like. Okay, it says on collision enter. I guess I should have moved the other cube beneath it so it could fall. On collision enter, on collision exit. See? Awesome. And then we have on application pause, which is, I'm just going to remove honestly because it's built in for Unity, but what I tend to do, I'm just going to remove it. I just use a static variable. So if I'm going to pause my game, I'll just use a public static bool game is paused, it was false. And then on my awake, I will set it to false because it's static, right? I want to make sure it's false when we start the game. And then when the game ends, or when the game is paused actually rather, I will call this, and then wherever I need something to be paused or disabled, I can use the static bool by just using game is paused somewhere else, or whatever the class reference is. Anyways, that's it guys. That's how you use your built-in functions, especially the most important and popular ones, and ones that get beginners confused. So yeah, I'm going to copy paste this and see you guys next time.